everybody to the virtual reception for the show Correspondence, Iceland to Boston and back. Wow, I'm just
You're
seeing
Adine. You're Adine Snorrason.
I'm Adine Snorrason, and my co-host is Rebecca Richards. We're very happy to have you all here today. We are going to be introducing the artists, Bert Halstead and Magnus Snorrason, and give you a little sense of how this show came about. Then we're going to be giving the show over to them, and they'll tell you about what they did with all their wonderful photographs. So Rebecca, did you have anything more to say?
Yes. So the idea for Correspondences came about as a result of a Belmont Art Association meeting in October. And Bert, who is a very active member and also the treasurer of the organization, gave a presentation of a photography trip that he took to Iceland earlier in the fall. And the images, I mean, frankly, were amazing as we were sitting there watching them. And the response among the people at that meeting was very enthusiastic, very positive. And I started thinking, I think towards the end of that meeting, even I mentioned to Bert, now wait a minute, there is somebody in Belmont who is from Iceland, who's also a photographer. Is there a way that maybe we could consider putting a show together? And Adine and I chatted about it, weren't sure exactly how it would work out. But Adine also conversed with Magnus about it. And, both Bert and Magnus thought that this was a great idea. Having Bert's work from Iceland as somebody who's a longtime Belmontonian, and Magnus, who is a newer Belmontonian, but who grew up in Iceland, but photographs, much of his work is in the Boston area. And so we thought that would be a very interesting pairing. And hence, I think Bert actually even came up with the title for the show. And one of the things that's been really interesting, Adine and I asked Bert and Magnus if they would like to curate the show, and they agreed. And so they're going to talk a little bit, I think, about that curation process. But Adine and I said, if you want, at the in-person show, in the gallery, it's a beautiful show. They're going to talk about the pairings. And so that's sort of the inception or the conception of the show. That's how it came about. And it came about really quite quickly, I think, from the time we first discussed it in October. And you hung it up, 2 weeks ago, maybe? I think about 2 weeks ago. The Nourish show, the final images got picked up, and Bert and Magnus hung the new show, Correspondences. So Adine, do you want to add a little bit more to the show, how the show sort of came about, or?
Well, it was really fun. It started with the misfortune that I missed the BGA meeting where Bert gave his wonderful slideshow. And so I was like, I missed it. I want to see it. And then Rebecca said, well, we could do a show. And then I said, well, but Magnus and Bert could do a show. And then we handed the idea over to them and they just ran with it. It was really fun to see how they worked through their different photographs and paired them up in fun and interesting and provocative ways. I can't wait to show you all. I can do the screen share and start the slideshow, and we can introduce.
Yes. So I'll give a little bit of background on Bert, and Adine will introduce Magnus, and then the two of them will also talk about themselves a little bit more. So Bert actually is a New Yorker by birth, but when he was a toddler, his family moved to Mexico City. He first picked up a camera when he was about 8 years old. His family moved back to New York. He ended up in the Boston area because he went to MIT, and he is a computer scientist by training. And he's loved photography really since he was a boy. And so he'll talk more about that and some of the techniques that he uses. And I did want to mention, I thought this was interesting. And he is drawn to images that have strong graphic statements. I thought that was interesting, Bert. And you love to find textures and interesting patterns, shapes, and repetitions in the images that you seek out. So I thought that was quite interesting in terms of what you're looking for in your photographic images. So I think that do we want Bert or Magnus now to chat a little bit about themselves, or, you know, this is a little bit freewheeling, everybody. So just
Okay,
bear
well,
with
here,
us.
let me just briefly introduce Magnus,
Yeah.
because like Bert, he was not born in Boston, but came to Boston for college. They both went to, you know, good schools in Cambridge. And but Magnus, he had a dark room in his basement when he was a teenager, won a photo contest. You got stacks of Ilford paper. But I know once he came back to Boston after college to live, he was really into digital cameras, like long before anybody else was really into it. And so he's ahead of the curve and has been doing some amazing photography since the 90s. He has quite a collection of wonderful, black and whites is certainly a strength, but certainly does photographs that give a sense of place. He's also a wonderful portrait photographer. He took pictures, graduation photos of my niece this year, which they were just stunning. So thank you, Magnus. You have a great breadth of talent. So would either of you like to add anything to that? Or would you like to launch into the slides and talk about how you put the show together?
Maybe one quick note was that Bert and I actually met at the last event there on my slide, the Darkroom Gallery, that we both had photos exhibited at. We had prints in the gallery in Burlington. And I am drawing a blank on how many years ago. Bert, what's your estimate?
Oh, probably 5 at least.
I'd say at least, yeah, like 6 or 7, I'm guessing. But in any case, it's funny, we had never met before. We, you know, 2 Belmontians, and it's like in Burlington, Vermont, and obviously photographers.
So take it away.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with a couple of sort of general comments. First of all, big thanks to Rebecca and Adine for this wonderful opportunity to mount this exhibit. It's been a real pleasure. Working with Magnus has certainly been a fabulous thing also. I also want to mention that I mean, Iceland was a place that I always wanted to visit, but you know, it takes time sometimes for these things to come together. And when it looked like the pandemic was easing a bit, I signed up for a photography tour of Iceland, which my wife Louise and I went on in September with Bobby and Lee's Photo Adventures, 2 photographers, Bobby Lane and Lee Varys, that we knew through the Boston Camera Club. And the other acknowledgement I have to give there is they worked with a local guide by the name of Einar Erlendsson, who knows Iceland like the back of his hand. And he has this 4-wheel drive 10-passenger van that he calls his magic bus. And he took us to all kinds of places that we would have just never gotten to if we were just tourists in Iceland. So we were very fortunate with that. And then we also stayed a couple of days later and did some of our own photography. I want to acknowledge all the fellow photographers that I've learned so much from over the years. And you know, a number of them are here on this Zoom reception, and I feel very honored by their presence. I also learned a lot from the speakers and judges at Boston Camera Club events, particularly some of you know about the Boston Camera Club photo banner, which was up in the Seaport District during this summer. The curator of that was Emily Bells, who gave a talk about how she did things. And it had a big influence on my thinking about this pairing operation. She managed to pair pictures up based on all kinds of different properties that they had. And I think you'll see some of that as we go along. And I certainly want to thank Dari Paquette and Naomi Dukas of the Belmont Art Association for encouraging me to present that first version of these images at the Belmont Art Association meeting. So as far as how we got this exhibit together, I think I had an easier time than Magnus because I just had 2 weeks of pictures from Iceland. Those, by definition, those were the only ones of mine that were considered. So I just kind of put out the ones that were halfway decent. And Magnus had to kind of go through his archives of years and years to figure out what he wanted to show. And so he found some candidate photos and put them into a Dropbox along with the photos that I had uploaded there. And then we said, gee, how do we actually curate this exhibit? The styles and the subjects are very different and everything. And this particular pair here, I think, was kind of the initial breakthrough where we said, oh, look, we have a natural canyon and a concrete canyon. So even though otherwise the pictures are quite different, the canyonness is something that ties them together. And then it got to be a lot of fun going through our other pictures and finding other ways that they could match up. And I thought it was actually a little bit like a game of concentration where you look at two pictures, no, they don't match. And you go look at some others, oh, that one could match with one of the ones that I was looking at earlier. And then you kind of go back. And eventually we came up with 15 pairs that are up in the gallery. And I think, you know, the way it turned out is really cool. So I'll just say a word about my picture here. This is a canyon on the left, which the name of which nobody born on this side of the ocean can pronounce. So Magnus will have to tell us how it's pronounced if he wants anybody to know. I briefly used the name of the canyon as the title of this photograph, and then I said, no, that's just not going to work. Nobody's going to be able to say it. But it's cool because it's kind of like the earth was just sort of unzipped, and the two sides of the canyon really mirror their shapes, just like, you know, the way South America fits into the gap in Africa on the world map. And so it was also an interesting photographic challenge because it was much darker at the bottom of the canyon than it was in the sky. And so I used some photographic technology, something called high dynamic range imaging, which helped me kind of record the detail all the way through. And then it was just a matter of trying to paint light in the right places so that the picture would work. So I think that's probably enough from me about this. Magnus, you want to talk about yours?
Sure. Yeah, just the preamble and following up on what you just said, that it definitely was wonderful to be able to have a concrete set of images to start out with. So your, was it 80 something original set from Iceland that you had obviously curated down significantly, clearly, because they were all excellent. So, you know, that doesn't happen by accident. That, you know, so that was the starting point. And I guess I was in denial for a little while. And I kept thinking, well, you know, I do have quite a few sort of, I guess we'd call them portfolios, but they aren't official or anything. They're just things that I've been thinking, you know, like alleys, for example. So this one, back alleys. I have a whole bunch of back alley photos from Boston. So it occurred to me, you know, there could be a good back alley that would work well with a canyon. So that's how this particular pairing came about. But the context here is that these all come from my Lightroom catalog, so I have one master catalog with 100,000 photos in it. And I have a few others too, but they have you know, significantly fewer photos total. But you know, my overall master catalog dating from 1990 has 100,000 total, and I've been an inconsistent user of a rating system. So star rating, and the highest rating is 5. So my very first step was just, okay, just show me the 5-star rated photos. You know, that automatically got rid of most of them. But I've also had this photo a day process, if you will. It started out as a challenge for myself. I just started the 6th year. So I started, you know, as of December 31st, I finished 5 full years, and I've not missed a day. But I did not start out thinking this would be such a long process. There's a very common photography thing to do. It's a 365 challenge. So you challenge yourself to create 365 photos, 1 per day for a year. And I was 5 years ago, I was definitely in a bit of a rut in terms of I would sometimes go for many weeks or maybe months in a few occasions without really using the camera at all. And it's like anything, muscle atrophies if it isn't used. And I just, I felt like, okay, taking a photo a day will force me to think about having the camera with me when I am going places. And that by itself helps. And so I didn't expect it would catch on the way it did. It just became a complete habit, and I've stuck with it. And let's see how long I'll keep it up. But this particular image comes about as a very typical example from my photo a day thinking. So this is the alley between Ballston and Newbury Street that opens onto Arlington. So it's between Arlington and Berkeley. So I'm right behind me is the iron fence for the public gardens. And right in the middle of the photo, right in front of me, is a sliver of the Restoration Hardware building that was actually built as the Museum of Science, back then called the Museum of Natural History, in the 1890s, I think. I have another photo that comes up later that shows this building much better. But that kind of places this, and you can't go wrong when you are in that part of town. So what I would sometimes do is I would just bring my camera, and in this case, I had a Pilates class on Newbury Street. I just made sure that I put in an extra 45 minutes on the meter. It's simple as that. So when I'm done in the class, I grab my camera, I start walking, and this was a weekly thing. So I would usually, 1 week I would go down Newbury East, 1 week I would go Berkeley North, 1 week I would go back towards Arlington. And each time I would just find a spot and hang out for a while. And I'd realized that looking into that alley, there's bound to be something happening at some point. And I counted up, I think I have 6 photos in my catalog from this alley. And another one that was actually a contender, but this one is clearly better, had a single rat running across from one of the garbage cans to another. And it has that classic, rats kind of run like waves. And it's kind of a cute photo, I have to admit, but it's, of course, the rats being so small, lots of people would look at that photo and never realize that the animal is in there. Technically speaking, we shoot with different cameras, Bert and I, and the ratio of the sensor is different on different brands. And so this is the ratio that you're seeing. This is the one that's native to his camera. It's a 3:2 ratio. Mine is wider. Mine is a 4:3. 3:4 versus a 2:3. And for this pairing, I really felt it was important, especially because we chose this for our advertising. I felt it was important to match that ratio. And lo and behold, this is what happens so many times. You are thrown a constraint and the art improves. This is a way better photo than the original, just by making it narrower, by making it more canyon-like. I just cropped, basically a bunch of dark wall on the left side and another garbage can on the right side. So little lesson in art school, always give yourself a constraint if you are in doubt, and then you can often end up with a better work.
Well said. On to the next one.
Sure. Sounds good. Actually, let's start on the technical on this one. And then I'll go into maybe the more obvious, interesting, how we curated this. But this is actually a vertical crop from a landscape, a horizontal image. which I don't do often because I'm throwing away so much of the actual content, so much of the pixels. But for me, that was important in this one because it really makes the guy in the middle stand out. He got kind of lost in the original version that there's an ocean of people on both sides in the corners, and they are utterly uninteresting photographically speaking. They're all just all over the place. Whereas this one guy definitely makes the image in my mind. I wish I could remember what he was looking at, but not something I captured at the moment. And of course, it has that canyon feel again, but a very, very different canyon. This one is completely filled to the brim. And this is the older image. This is from a period when I worked in the financial district. So I would take the red line to downtown crossing and then walk, which would realistically, it would only have to take me 12 minutes to get from downtown crossing to my office. And if I was in a huge hurry, I did that. But 99% of the time, I would take at least 20, sometimes 30 minutes, because I would never go the shortest route. And this particular, for example, this is on Summer Street. That's not the shortest way to get from downtown crossing to over on Broad Street where I used to work. And this was obviously in the evening, so this is me returning. And I discovered there was an event. This was early December. Clearly a manufactured event to get people to come shopping, but it was a beautifully warm night. And there's one of those things where all of a sudden downtown becomes alive again. And, I've been in the area long enough. I mean, I do remember when Macy's was a real destination. And then, of course, Filene's, which was just around the corner there, was an even bigger destination. So it is kind of nice to see every now and then downtown still regains its feeling of being a really dense downtown, appropriate for a major city. Compare that to Bert's lovely photo from the hill in Iceland that I can guarantee you that there are, on the busiest days ever, there are probably not more than 10 people on that whole mountain. Probably in the entire history of the country, it's never been more than 10 people at one point. I think there is one person in the far left of that photo, but other
yes,
than that,
I think so.
See, I don't know if it's still true that we have more sheep in Iceland than people, but that certainly was the case for a very, very long time. I think the Falkland Islands and Iceland were the two places that used to brag about that. Yeah, no, Iceland is per capita versus, square footage. It's extremely free of crowds in most places and most seasons. We do get a lot more tourists now than we used to. It's a fairly new thing. We went from an average of maybe 50 to 80,000 tourists a year to 2.5 million now, which is a bit of, and that change happened over 3 years. We went from maybe. Yeah, this is pre-pandemic, so maybe the numbers are maybe 1.5, 2 million now, but I haven't checked recently. But they are obviously also, they're not spread out over the whole year. There's more of a concentration in the summer. So yes, we do get crowds in Iceland. Bert chose well, was there after the summer season. My son and I were actually just 3 weeks right ahead of Bert and his trip, and we were in similar areas. This is in the southeast, and
yeah,
I don't know if we walked by that same place, but we certainly it's just lovely to think about that there are still plenty of places in Iceland where you will not find other human beings, uncrowded as the best of them.
So if I could say, yeah, if I could say a couple of things about it, Magnus proposed this pairing, and I just loved the idea of all the holiday shoppers being like a crowd of sheep. It's just like the perfect, it's not, the pictures aren't geometrically similar, they're not in a similar kind of environment, but there's that ties them together. I do want to tell a little bit about the color picture here, which I took. This was one of those things we would never have gotten to if we hadn't had our guide there in Iceland. The custom among the sheep farmers is to release their sheep up into the highlands in the spring, and they just go eat grass and grow all summer on their own. But then in the fall, they have to be brought back down, because if they get marooned in the snow, they're gone. And so all the sheep from all the different farmers are up there, socializing and eating all summer. And then on a given day, there's a guy who our guide called the King of the Mountain, who's elected, who coordinates the sheep drive and says, okay, this is when we're going to do it. And all the farmers get together and help bring the sheep down, no matter if it's their sheep or somebody else's. And they sort them out at the end when they get down to the bottom. So he knew it was going to be on this particular day. He had permission to go up there and be in the middle of it. And we got treated to a really unusual spectacle. And this was only a part of it, with all the sheep kind of coming down the mountain and getting ready to cross a little stream just out of the picture. So we got all kinds of beautiful sheep pictures that day.
Shall we move on to the next slide?
Good to me.
All right.
Is this
You're
one,
on, Magnus.
This one is me. Okay. Yeah. So Bert's photo is stunning, and I think we felt right from first seeing that in our Dropbox folder that this one has to find a mate. This one just belongs in the exhibition one way or the other. And I did definitely go through a few of mine that I felt were, okay and could maybe work because of some geometric relationship or because the way of the light. And I was never ecstatic about any of them. And then I gave up on the whole, trying to match the appearance, and let's just try for the feel of it. And there, icebergs and certainly, this one is it's a glacier that we have a word in Icelandic, skriðjökull. It's the glacier that's crawling out into the fjord in this case. And it does this, it carves off these massive bergs right at the front. And they do look like buildings, and they sometimes are quite magnificent. And of course, Bert's photo captured it in the perfect light. So I liked the thought of, the light is coming from inside. It's not, there's a very different situation here. It's not, this is a millennium tower that actually sits at the site of the former Fælins, right downtown. So this is just around the corner from the previous photo. And I'm standing on Franklin Street, shooting it so from the back, so to speak. But with the fog at the top, completely hiding it's a 60-floor tower. It's one of the tallest in Boston, hiding the top of it, and then the clouds rolling in Bert's photo. But I definitely, my thought was the light coming from within the building. The light on that piece of glacier there was what tied it all together. So
to me, also the sort of jaunty angle of Magnus's building and the spire on the glacier there, I think was a very kind of compelling analogy between the two. But I have to tell this I think I can pronounce the name of this glacier. It's Svinafellsjökull. And we arrived, and there's this very picturesque lake, and this, you can just see all of the scenery, the different levels of the glacier and the mountains and everything, and different colors of the ice. That stuff on the right, which looks brown, that's ice also, but it's kind of all full of dirt. Just a marvelous place, but it was a pretty cloudy day, and there were just like little, as you can see, just little areas where the sun was shining through a hole in the clouds. And when we got there, we immediately noticed this wonderful spire of ice up in the front, but the sun wasn't shining on it. And I spent the longest time standing around waiting to see if one of those little spots of sunlight would move along and finally light it up. And I eventually decided it just wasn't going to happen, because we didn't have forever there. We had an hour and a half or something, and I could either wait for that or I could go find something else to take a picture of. So I went off over to the right and started puttering around over there. And I looked back and, oh my God, here comes the sun. And so I'm running back as fast as I can. Every 20 steps or so, I stop and take a picture, because I don't know if, the sun's just about to go away. And I got as far as where this was, and took this picture, and then the sun finally left. So this was my final attempt. But it really, the color of glacial ice is an amazing thing. Those of you who have seen it, I'm sure, know exactly what I'm talking about. There's this blue that comes out from inside, and with the sun lighting it up, it just was a magical thing, and I really wanted to capture it. So I was very happy that at least I got this.
Next.
Yeah. So this one, our guide took us to this place, which actually anybody can go to, in the southeastern Iceland. It's called the Stokksnes, and some people call it a peninsula, and some call it a headland. But if you look back across, you see this massif that includes the Vestrahorn mountain, which I think is one of Iceland's iconic mountain peaks. And the beach itself is interesting, because it's all black sand, as most of the beaches that we saw were, but they have these mounds of beach grass. And so we arrived, and again, clouds are your companion when you're traveling in Iceland almost all the time. But I loved the way the clouds would sometimes reveal details of the peaks and then cover them up again. And so you just had to take picture after picture, because the scene was always changing. But in the end, probably from my artist statement about liking patterns and repetitions, I think this picture on the left is probably one of the better examples of that in this show, which is I really liked how the shape of the mounds of beach grass and the mountains and that white cloud all kind of mirror each other. And so to me, that made a very appealing photograph. And of course, the late afternoon sun shining on the beach grass and the little bit of blue sky at the top are gifts that you just take them when you get them. And so that's pretty much the story of this photograph. Oh, and I had to say, I love the pairing, which again was suggested by Magnus, with the photograph on the right, which he can talk more about. But it's almost hard to put into words, but there's something about the peak on that building and the peaks on the other side that I just think they really go together. And Magnus's picture, if you go see it in the gallery, it is truly gorgeous, the colors of it, and just extraordinary. And I admire it a whole bunch. So anyway, I'm done now.
You're too kind. This pairing came out of frustration with, I had another photo picked for this one that really matched the shape of the mountain beautifully. It just seemed like, oh, this is an obvious thing. And it was also, and mist on top. It was a building scene from kind of an angle that made the triangular shape of the building of the mountain echo in that building with the mist in the background. But it was a nighttime photo, and I have a few of those. But there was just it's I don't know, it's too simple, and I just knew I had to find something better, but I couldn't find anything better. I mentioned 100,000 photos, you know. it definitely, this was one of the very last ones that I changed in the pairings. When I finally realized this one actually had been in my mind and I couldn't find anything to pair it with. So this was going to be one of my 6 non-paired photos. But then it just kind of hit me. It's like, wait, this is a much stronger photo than the one I had in mind before. And geometrically not nearly as obvious, but it does have mist, it does have a triangle, and why not? So yeah, this is the building I mentioned before that you could see a sliver of in the alleyway in the black and white first photo. I do shoot a lot of black and white, but every now and then, like in this particular case, that saturated blue in the background, it really was there, and I just couldn't let it go. And of course, the contrasting, you know, I call this the 3 generations because, you know, if we go from the front, so as I mentioned, that's the building that was built for the Museum of Science, where it originally started. I believe it's 1850s, and has gone through multiple uses since, and it's a restoration hardware store right now. The middle distance building is 500 Boylston, 1980s, very typical office tower. You know, not terribly interesting in most ways, but hey, it's the 80s. And then the one in the background is the Hancock Tower. And that one, you know, does have its own grandeur. Lots of people have different opinions about it, but it's massive, and it is over 60 floors, I believe. 60, yeah, it's definitely a little taller than the Millennial Tower, and that's about the tallest it gets around Boston. And again, when you have any kind of low cloud ceiling, you're going to have that wonderful effect of the building just piercing up into the clouds. And I don't really know where that blue came from, but I loved it. So I could not turn this into a black and white. Totally different. This pairing, I think, is something we agreed would be a nice, quiet moment as you're walking through the gallery. It's so much more just low key in all ways, and definitely strong compositions on both sides. I think they would stand fine on their own, but they really do go well together. I think that's something that, you know, this is a case of neither image is something that either one of us would have fought for including in the exhibition, but together they work. The specifics of mine is that I was actually working in the easternmost office in Boston proper, right on the very, very tip of Black Falcon Pier, where the cruise ships pull in. There's an old Navy building there, massive building. 88 Black Falcon is it sticks out into the ocean, and I was in the office on the end of the building. And when you're out in the harbor and the weather does what the weather does, you really can't miss it. So that day we were just being pummeled by the rain, and the large windows were, you know, literally like a drum. So I just left my desk, brought the camera, and found a door up on the parking deck where I could at least partially open the door without being just, you know, immediately soaked from the rain. And I did get quite wet just standing there for 30 seconds to take maybe 5 frames, but it was that kind of rain. And it really didn't even require a whole lot of editing. This is pretty much the way it looked, just these bands of water coming down. And this, again, I think, you know, this is something where the black and white is natural. There wasn't a whole lot of color there to begin with.
So on the right, the thing that attracted me to take this picture was like, once again, the mist on the mountains, which I just love, all those jagged shapes with the kind of partially obscured and misty sections as well. And this was on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. We took there's sort of, you can kind of drive a big loop, and this was the last place in the day when we stopped. It was already getting dark, and I saw that mountain and I wanted to do it. But initially we were kind of overlooking this field in a way that in the foreground, this drainage ditch or whatever it is, was just straight across from right to left in the picture. And I thought it wasn't dynamic enough. But then I discovered if I walked over to the edge of the parking lot I was standing in, I could be in front of this place where it made a little S-curve. And to me, that made the shapes in the picture much more interesting. So I took this at a somewhat high ISO speed on my camera, because it was really getting pretty dark, especially with all those really dark clouds. And then after that, we packed up and the sun set and we went and had dinner. But I don't remember which one of us initially proposed this pairing, but I think this is one where it's not, the predominant thing is just the feeling is what we're trying to compare between these two pictures. That's all I have to say. So this was just a lovely stop that we made. Before I go into that, I have to credit my wife Louise for opening my eyes to this pair, because I was showing her the pictures that Magnus had uploaded, and she saw this one on the right with that kid wearing that little red jacket, and she says, "Oh, that's like the red jacket in this picture over here." And I thought that was just a really interesting and different way to pair things up. It's like the tiniest element in the picture is the thing that they have in common. Although there are, I think, some sort of vertical shapes and, you know, and diagonals and so on also. But so that's how that came to pass. And I think, you know, once we saw that, you know, how could you not do it? But anyway, the one on the left is one of the less famous waterfalls, although it's quite easily accessible if you're on the Iceland's Ring Road, sort of on the south side of the island. With waterfalls, there's this big debate about whether you should shoot them with a quick enough shutter speed to freeze the falling water, or you should go for a long exposure to get this kind of silky effect. And there are lots of pros and cons, which I probably shouldn't spend too much time talking about right now. But suffice it to say that my approach with a lot of these was to find the place that I wanted to take the picture from and set up my camera, and then just take a whole range of shutter speeds so that if I change my mind later on, I'd have the material to work with. And it's fortunate that I did so, because just as I was setting up, a busload of tourists arrived. And they were walking all over the place. And what I was able to do was to take two different exposures that I had taken from my tripod and blot out all of the tourists, because the green grass from one of them would be where a tourist was in the other one, and vice versa. So it's really a layer of two pictures. And all that's left in the red jacket is our tour leader, Bobby Lane, who, believe it or not, held that without me asking her to or anything. She held that pose for a whole second of the exposure, because she was so intent on trying to figure out, you know, how she wanted to photograph this falls. And later on, I did actually go down there and photograph it from down there, and that came out pretty well also. But I liked, well, the location I loved, and the sort of S-curve of the stream flowing away from the falls really attracted my eye. And finally, often when you take the long exposures and you get this silky kind of feel, what you lose is the texture of the waterfalls. But here, there's this little rivulet that's off to the right of the main falls that's kind of coming down, that's in my mind, just kind of a lovely detail. So I felt pretty good about using this version of it. And this also is, I mean, two words that I would use for the landscape in most of Iceland is green and treeless. And this really shows all of that. So anyway, that's my spiel.
I have to remember that. Those are two words that apply extremely well. Yeah, so, well, the scene in the photo on the right is near and dear to my heart. These are the steps of Widener Library in Harvard Yard. And yeah, the kid is not a plant. I have no idea whose kid that was. This is just, again, me with the camera hanging around, waiting for something to happen to provide the human element and make the photo a little more interesting. And lo and behold, this dad who is just off the frame to the right, just let this kid loose. And that kid was going to crawl up those stairs, come hell or high water. So anyway, yes, this was this was another case of, you know, capturing the moment where, you know, I knew that something would happen. But yeah, the memories of that place. So I lived in the building in the background for my freshman year. And actually on the other side, I didn't have that exact view, but that's well north. And then I got married up on the plinth there, right next to these steps. So I definitely, I have fond memories of this place, not to mention the fact that it's one of the world's best libraries, minor detail. I don't know if the statistics are still true, but they had at one point the largest collection of books in a single building outside of the Library of Congress. So it's quite a bit. It's actually, you know, from the outside, it looks imposing, but it has more underground than above ground. So if you ever get a chance to see it, go for it.
So I think you've seen this pair before, but as Magnus and I were hanging the show, we realized that some of our pairs could actually be paired in turn to create an even bigger conversation. And so we ended up doing that in a couple of places, and one of them was with this one and the next one, which Adine can show us. And imagine the first one being on the left and this one being on the right. And in a moment, she has a picture of the wall, but I'll just say about this one, and I don't know if Magnus wants to add anything. You know, this is your picture of, you know, horizontal wide open spaces. These are the sheep, those little white specks coming to a sort of a holding pen before they move on to the next stage of their journey, which might be the next day. And it was just really the wide open spaces of the highlands of Iceland that you can see there. This enormous valley and this, you know, seemingly limitless sky up above it. Magnus, you want to say anything about your picture before we move on?
Well, if I want to be poetic about it, then it's the extremely limited as opposed to the
right.
limitless. You know, that it's, I mean, it's from the Alewife parking garage, and there's the tree line in the mist there in the background is, you know, my little nod to nature. I mean, Alewife actually has a good bit of nature tucked in pockets here and there, but God knows this parking garage is not a pretty sight. But it frames things, and it does have its own dirty splendor, maybe would be the term to use. So that's all I have to say about that.
So
but actually, sorry, there's but to echo what you said about the pair of pairs. So the two in the middle obviously go together, but in a strange way, I think that, yeah, you want to switch to the next slide? Sure, yeah. I think the two on the ends are related too. I mean, they are related in the contrast. You know, the one is the verticals and the other is the horizontals. And one is the full of people and the other one is completely empty of people. And of course, there are black and whites on the sides of the color pair.
So to me, this was kind of reminiscent of the old game where how can you change bus to car by changing one letter at a time, and you always have a word. So how do you go from holiday shopping to the Alewife parking garage? Well, obviously you go to Iceland and you have sheep, and then you get back to the other one. And that tickles my fancy that we were able to do that.
It's great. I love that. And there are, you've done a lot of wonderful sort of poetic collections at the gallery. So I just want to encourage everyone to, if they can, to get a chance to go to the third floor in the Homer building. I've got your extra pair if you guys want to talk about that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so we do also, I think neither one of us could resist putting a few of our favorite photographs into the exhibit, even though we didn't have pairs for them. And one of the extraordinary experiences that Louise and I had while we were in Iceland, and many of you may know that there was a volcano that was active for much of 2021 in Iceland, and it was kind of the most user-friendly volcano that you could really have. It was an hour's drive from Reykjavik, a moderate hike up to a nice overlook, not an explosive volcano or one that, you know, could hurt you if you were, you know.
Nobody died the entire time.
That's right. If you were there at the wrong moment. Instead, it just spewed out this amazingly liquid, orange glowing hot lava. And so I looked around, I took all kinds of pictures of it. Of course, Louise and I hiked up on one of the last days that it was active. It was super active on this day. But this one was the one that I think sort of best summarized the whole experience. And you can see that the lava was flowing in from the left, and you can kind of see a little sort of channel that goes from left to right across the picture. And because the air is a lot cooler than the lava, it tends to solidify on top, even though it's still very hot and liquid underneath. But then when it comes to a place where the landscape is uneven, like these falls in the foreground, it tumbles over it, and the stress of going over that breaks up the chunks of solidified lava on top. And so you can again see the orange in there. It was really a remarkable sight. We could have watched it for hours and hours, but after about 2 hours, we had to turn around and leave because we had an appointment in Reykjavik for our COVID test so we could fly home the next day. But it was really special to have a chance to see this. And so this is something I really wanted to put into the exhibit.
Good choice.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you.
Now, this is one of my personal favorites. I own this one.
Yes, no, this one has actually been in an earlier exhibit at the Belmont Gallery of Art. And just to prove, I do sometimes shoot other things than buildings and people, you know, ta-da, it's proof, right? But yeah, no, it's hard to escape from. If you're going to live in Belmont, you're going to discover the Pine Alley at some point or another. It's a nearly 1,000 feet long row of trees. It's actually a quadruple row. The center is the one with well, it must have been a carriage path originally, a hiking path now, straight as an arrow. And these are white pines, and unfortunately they are of a certain age. I saw the statistic of a recent survey. There's something close to 180 missing trees total. So, you know, imagine what it looked like when it had every single tree, and you know, after it had grown up. It's planted in the early 1900s, I believe. I'm not found out if this is Olmsted's work. Olmsted landscaped the grounds of McLean Hospital, and this is at the very edge of that. This follows Concord for you local folk. Any case, I could go on. I absolutely love the Pine Alley. And I live walking distance from this place, and so I go there all the time. And oftentimes there are a lot of people there. It's very popular with dog walkers and joggers. But in the middle of winter, in the middle of a snowstorm, I'm the only one. And it really baffles me because it's so beautiful in a snowstorm. Especially when you have this slightly sticky stuff that just cakes the trees on one side and gives them this wonderful three-dimensionality. You really, you can't help but feel how, you know, each tree has this shape, this roundedness to it because the snow basically paints it that way. And, you know, it's just a natural wonder, really, but obviously man-made. So I guess, you know, that way it fits in with the theme of the exhibit too, that much of Bert's photography shows very natural, pristine environments, and the photos that I have that show you know, nature in any form, they invariably show it attached to some human artifact. In this case, obviously, these are you know, these are trees that were put up, you know, or were grown in that alley arrangement.
I hope I was successful in stopping the screen share. Did I do it okay?
Yeah.
I
Okay.
actually have a question. I wanted to ask, since Bert had these approximately 80 photographs from, you know, that he, during his trip to Iceland that were considered to be, you know, considered for the exhibit, Magnus, was there a particular image of Bert's that was more like, you know, was there a pairing that was like more challenging than others to find, you know, a photograph, like the two photographs that would complement or, you know, converse with each other? Was there one that, or more, was there one in particular that maybe was challenging?
Yeah, actually, I mentioned with Westerhorn, the mountain in the sort of triangular shaped mountain that peaks into the clouds. That one, I mean, it was challenging because I jumped on the wrong horse. First, I just thought, oh, it's a sharp triangle, and I know I have building photos that look just like that. And you know, so I ended up with something that just didn't do it for me. But I kept thinking, damn it, there's got to be something better in here. And so yes, I really did keep looking, and then ended up with that 3 generations one, the color photo of the buildings that I think is my only building color photo out of the whole set. That,
And
yeah, that did not come easy.
So I also wanted to ask, when you saw Bert's photograph of with, you know, one of the people that led the photography tour with the red jacket, did you remember right away that you had this photograph of
No.
this child with the?
Absolutely not. Oh no. As Bert said, that was Louise's doing. Neither one of us had thought of that one.
Yay, Louise. I guess we'd like to open this up.
Yes, let's
to
open up for questions.
anyone who have questions.
Oh. Naomi.
Just go ahead and unmute.
Sorry, I wanted to ask what role, you know, what amount or what you do with Photoshop and so forth, or how much is manipulated with Photoshop, or how you use it. If you could talk a little bit about that, each of you.
Do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Yeah, so well, the quick answer is I don't actually use Photoshop. I use something called Lightroom. You know, it's a different flavor. I almost never think of a photo as being done straight out of the camera. That would just well, I think Ansel Adams and I would have the same reaction to that. That is just a complete anathema. That is not a done image. That is what the camera happened to capture at that time. What you had in your mind is always going to be different. So I always change things in Lightroom, but what I generally do is I adjust contrast, I adjust brightness, I locally make some things darker and some things brighter. There are changes sometimes that have to do with well, things that I didn't realize at the time. Like I might crop the image differently. I might remove something from the edges by simply, you know, contracting the frame, or like I mentioned with the crowded one, where I completely cropped off the sides of the frame altogether. this is a pretty significant change. I do sometimes, do local changes that, of the type where like removing an object from an image. It's, I don't know, specific examples might be, say, for example, I intend something to be in black and white, and there is a bright orange traffic cone in the photo. And I think, doesn't matter because orange in gray, that becomes gray once you turn it black and white. And then I change my mind and I decide, no, actually, I like the colors in this photo, but then that orange traffic cone is horrible. It clashes with everything else. Then I might simply edit it out. So yes, I'm not a purist, if that's what you're asking, but I first of all, I don't do much because it takes so darn long to do that kind of editing.
Right. Now, I was wondering about the purist because I have a friend whose slogan is "What you see is what I saw," and her photos are also beautiful. But on the other hand, manipulating them is a certain art form as well, and that's almost like painting with photography.
Exactly.
Yeah. If I could put in a 2 cents. First of all, I identify very much with what Magnus just said, and I also use Lightroom for most of my images. And the quote from Ansel Adams, which I love, is that the negative is the score and the print is the performance.
Thank you. I was trying to remember that.
And I think it's really a wonderful analogy. And he was famous for doing all kinds of, not manipulation, but burning in this area, lightening that area, and so on and so forth. With the digital darkroom, you can do actually a lot more of that. And I find it's rare that a photograph that I take can't have its impact improved, and it with still being true to the scene as I saw it, with some contrast adjustments and color adjustments and other things. And also cropping and straightening the horizon and other issues that can come up. I did mention the picture in the waterfall where I actually blended 2 images to erase all the tourists. That is a very rare thing for me to do. But in that case, I thought that it was giving me a truth of that scene, which is the way I wanted to see it. And where I could have seen it that way. And so I felt okay about it. But really, the other thing is, in the situation I was in, where you arrived at a scene and you had to do your best with it at that time because you weren't going to be there again. Sometimes the conditions are not ideal. If it's, for example, a very gray sky, which happens quite a bit in Iceland, there are tools in Lightroom that are spectacular for enhancing the dehaze filter is spectacular for enhancing the cloud patterns and textures that actually were there in the sky, but just in your original picture out of the camera, it just looks like a flat white. And so I would do a fair amount of that where necessary, but always trying to maintain a kind of reality that's true to what I saw when I was there.
Thanks.
Got a few more questions. Tell me if I'm doing terrible things to your name. Banafshe?
It's got to be me. It's got to be me. It's always my name. Yes, it's Banafshe. Thank you. So yes, I really enjoyed this. Thank you. I really enjoyed this sort of juxtaposition of your both work. I usually don't like, Bert knows me well. I am a purist when it comes, but I really loved it. I think it really showed, because I do actually curate a lot of shows myself. I really loved the fact that it was really thoughtful, and you could really see that you guys put some thoughts together in order to really match these photos from 2 different perspectives. So bravo, beautiful, both of you, great job. Bert, you're a much better photographer than Ansel Adams, trust me.
Thank you.
Yes, much better photographer. Yes, trust me, I still to this day, I always wonder. I do have actually one of his prints, actual prints. It's obviously, Moon over Hernandez, which is actually one of his best photos. But we all know that how great he was when it comes to darkroom, and that's how he became famous. So I think that the first question I wanted to, so beautiful work. I have seen this work of yours on Facebook. I would love to come and see it. Magnus, I think I got my answer. You don't shoot straight in black and white. You actually come home and you decide this and that and this and that. And am I correct?
Yeah, I would say that if I have 100 photos from an outing, I will maybe edit 10 of them a little bit. And then
Right.
if I'm lucky, I will have 2 or 3 that I really like. And I will maybe spend an hour or 2 on each one of those.
Okay, so you never shoot, you actually don't see the subject as black and white first. You shoot color and then you bring it home in front of your
there are times when I
desktop.
shoot, yeah, but there are times when I shoot that shoot the subject specifically thinking it'll look
Okay.
better black and white. Oh yeah. Now, and just to
Gotcha.
mention,
Okay.
if anybody ever wants to buy me that Leica monochrome camera that shoots native black and white, I'd be happy to try it.
Yes, I actually shoot with Leica, and you're right. When you shoot the Leica, you don't need to do anything with it. It's just incredible, from film to digital. So it's really magnificent. But again, thank you, both of you. And I will maybe drive at some point to Belmont and see the show in person.
Please.
It was gorgeous. Thank you.
You can always
Thank
see
you.
online at virtualbga.org. I know it's not as good as seeing the photos right there, but
Yes, come see the prints.
Good. No,
Yes,
I would love
absolutely.
to. I live in Newburyport, so I really it
Oh.
would take me an hour to get there. I live in Newburyport, so I have to drive there. But I'm always in town because my studio is actually, as Bert knows, is in Boston. So I'm gonna definitely try to take the trip to Belmont. There we go. And get some Armenian food at the same time.
there you go.
Well, Banafshe,
Thank you. Thank you,
know.
both of you. Congratulations.
Thank
Thank-
you so much.
thank you,
Yes,
Banafshe.
definitely. When I get there, I'll definitely, maybe we can grab a cup of coffee with mask on. There you go.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I'll bring a
Yes,
coffee.
lovely. Thank you. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Mark DeQ. Hey, Mark.
Hi,
Hi.
Mark.
Boy, I'd love to be in the gallery and make some wine pairings to go with that.
What a great idea.
My question for both of you is, just as photographers in the field, what other kinds of tools of the trade besides the camera do you bring with you that you've just found to be useful, that might be good things for those of us that are trying to go out and take photographs ourselves?
Okay, I can go first. I mean, I think it's there is an easy answer, a lens. You probably do need to build a bit of an intuition for what's the right lens to bring to any particular outing, just because, I mean, first of all, if assuming that, this is the kind of thing where you are going down the rabbit hole, you are going to buy, either a DSLR or a mirrorless camera with interchangeable lenses. And from then, there's no hope for you beyond that, of course. So then the eternal question is which lens or lenses to bring to any given thing. And I mean, lenses are both expensive and heavy in general. So, you never want to take more than you need. So yeah, choosing the right lens, thinking about, is it going to get dark? Do you need a large aperture? Are you going to be physically close enough, or do you need a long lens? Do you need zoom, or can you just pick a prime, which is automatically going to give you somewhat better image quality and certainly a larger aperture? These are questions you kind of learn to ask yourself before heading out for the day with the camera.
So I'll toss in a comment. I probably travel kind of heavy compared to some photographers. And so most of the time, if I'm going out to like on one of these trips, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to encounter. And so I typically overpack, which someday will come back to bite me. But anyway, so I usually have a wide angle zoom lens, a sort of medium zoom lens, and a telephoto zoom lens. But I would say probably 90% of my images are captured with my 24 to 105 millimeter zoom lens that goes on my full frame Canon camera, just for those of you for whom that's meaningful. I am not a big tripod user because I like to be able to be mobile and choose different points of view. And if you're kind of setting up on a tripod, you know, the good thing is it slows you down, and the bad thing is it slows you down in terms of being able to seek out other viewpoints. I got gratification from the fact that our highly professional tour guides, Bobby Lane and Lee Varys, rarely use tripods either. That said, there are things you have to use tripods for. And you know, any of those silky waterfall pictures are examples of that. And so then I would have my tripod and my, you know, remote shutter release available. And then the other thing that we always had to take, given the weather, is plastic bags to put our cameras in, and you know, towels to wipe them off. Fortunately, we had pretty good luck. We didn't have to use that too much, but that's pretty much it. It wasn't, you know, it's just one camera body and a couple of lenses to handle the different situations that I thought might come up.
Great, thanks.
And the fact that today's cameras have image stabilization is fabulous in terms of the quality of images that you can get just hand holding. So that's a big help too.
I just thought I'd add just a tiny practical thing that would just, when you mentioned the plastic bag for the elements, and the cold weather here in New England, it's really helpful when the camera has gotten very cold, when you've been outside for a while shooting, is put the camera in a Ziploc bag while you're still outside, like as in on the doorstep, and let it warm up inside the house, inside the Ziploc bag, because otherwise you get condensation. And it's not just the condensation on the outside, which you can wipe off, it's a condensation on the electronics inside the camera that's a problem. So, you know, we all keep our houses much more humid than the cold winter weather outside, and that really does shorten the lifespan of electronics.
That's a really good tip. Thank you. We've got a question from David Kahn.
Yeah, thanks, Bert, for inviting me to this. I met Bert in the 1970s at MIT, and we were both in the computer science department. And it's wonderful to meet you, Magnus. I love your work also. And I think it's interesting that decades after Bert and I met, and we'd been apart, I think it was at NECCC that we met again or something.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine that, we have similar hobbies after all these years. So congratulations on putting together a great show. I can tell how much work went into this pairing and whatever, and it's wonderful. My question is, and I'm sure some other folks might be wondering, if anyone's interested in buying something, what's the procedure? Ooh. Now that we're all virtual, how does one do that?
Well, there are two ways. I mean, if you come to the gallery in person, you can choose what you'd like to buy among the works in the exhibit. And in person in the gallery, you choose which one of these photographs you'd like to buy. And there also are some prints. Bert and Magnus have also said that there's a framed price, there's an unframed price. I think that you also said you would make custom prints. Is that right? Did we decide on that for sure? Yes.
Yeah.
And so you just, you know, if they're gallery sitting, it would be with either Bert or Magnus. If I'm gallery sitting, I'm Rebecca. Adine and I actually run the BGA together. And you write out a check. The one thing you cannot do is you cannot take the work, if it's on the wall, you're not able to take it until the show is over, because we have to keep the integrity of the exhibit whole. But if you buy something from one of the print bins, you can buy it, pay for it, and walk out the door with it. And Adine can talk a little bit about if you decide to buy something through the virtual space.
Well, I think the best thing to do always is just email us at admin@belmontgallery.org. It's simple, actually. From the website, you can just click on the email us and it'll pull up an email for you, and you can just tell us what you're interested in. And then we'll turn you over to Bert and Magnus if you need anything custom done, and you can talk over price and what have you. But there is just a simple, it's $200 for the framed ones, $150 for unframed.
125.
125.
Sorry, thank you, Bert. And then there are other assorted printed photographs in the bins at the gallery. So I don't know if those are the same prices. Those may be different.
Yeah, I think at least in my bin, there's one that's a smaller print, and so I put a lower price on it. But the basic idea is that if you want them framed just the way they are in the gallery, it's $200, and you can email, if you're not coming in, you can email to the gallery to make your wishes known. If you want an unframed print that's exactly the same size as what's displayed there, you can get that. And if you want something else, different framing or different size, just talk to us and we'll work something out.
And if two people want the same one, it's great because it's a photo.
Yeah, right.
I've actually heard people talk about that they want to buy one or the other, and it's usually there's overlap. So hopefully a lot of your photos will be going home to very happy homes.
I was going to say, David, you could also be in touch with Bert, and then Bert could be, will be in touch with me or Adine if you wanted to do it, or Magnus that way.
Magnus, yeah.
And we're in constant contact with each other. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Question. We have Aisha.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you're close enough, Aisha. So, all right. Well, I just wanted to say it's a great exhibit. I have yet to actually drive in. I did look at it virtually, but I'm, in West Cambridge, less than 10 minutes away from Belmont Gallery, so I have no excuse to go over. But I do have one question for each photographer here. So Bert, I'll start with you. I really love the light in a lot of your photos from Iceland. And I was wondering, did you get a chance to do any photography at night, or were most of your photos taken during the day?
Most of them were taken during the day. You can probably imagine that one of the goals, if at all possible, for a tour of Iceland was to get a chance to photograph the Northern Lights, which of course would be at night. And there was at least one night that had a very strong aurora display, but where we were, it was cloudy. So we didn't get to see it. A good friend of mine who was also in Iceland at the same time, 50 miles away, caught some wonderful pictures of it. So, it's just it's the luck of the draw. So there could have been some night pictures, but since it was cloudy a lot, and since we were really busy during the days a lot, I don't think that I have any nighttime pictures at all from my trip.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I feel like it's like one of those things, like if you're trying to photograph auroras, you kind of have to drive around. You can't even be in one place. Like oftentimes I'm just like driving where I hear reports, it might be there, and then I'll drive to another location until I find them. So they're kind of hard to photograph, but cool, but great photos. I really enjoyed them. And Magnus, the question I have for you, so like, when you guys were matching your photos, were you looking through mostly your repository, or did that inspire one of your photo a day kind of thing? You're like, okay, well, I really like this photo that Bert took, so I have to go take a photo that matches that or something.
No, I didn't end up shooting specifically to match anything, although there is one photo that is from New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. No, New Year's Day. So yeah, first day of this year. that did end up making it in, but it's in the unmatched category. It doesn't have
Okay.
a pair with.
Okay.
Yeah. And no, that's a funny question. No, it seemed like I really should limit myself and not add anything beyond. I actually limited also backwards in time. I didn't look further back than 5 years in my own catalog.
Okay.
Just for sanity reasons, really, more than anything else.
Yeah,
I
it's just a lot of photos to go through. So
I wanted to mention that, so Bert and Magnus are sort of sharing most of the Sunday gallery sitting, or like, one might take one Sunday, one the other Sunday. So you have an opportunity to come up, see the exhibit in person, and also converse with one of the photographers, one of the artists who will be on site. And that's always a wonderful opportunity to really engage them and learn more about their processes and so on and so forth. So I would encourage people. We try to promote when there's going to be a particular artist at the gallery on a Sunday afternoon.
We actually have calendars on the virtual BGA website that show when Bert is there and when Magnus is there. One or the other is always going to be there on Sundays and Thursdays. And the calendar also shows special events like this event and ones that are upcoming.
And that's a good segue, Adine, to our next event next week.
Next week, we have a woman who's doing a special presentation on Iceland, myths and the landscape. Her name is Heidi Hermann, and her mother was Icelandic, was a war bride, came, and she was born in the United States, but she's traveled a lot to Iceland, and she has this wonderful show with photographs and stories, which will be next week is the 27th. From 7 to 8 here as well. And there will be a Zoom link. You could definitely see it on the virtual BGA or sign up for our email list at email Rebecca at admin at Belmont Gallery.org.
So then you'll get onto the mailing list and you'll get all of the e-blasts and so on and so forth that we've been sending out.
On Instagram too. I always
Yes.
try to post what's coming up, and particularly if Bert will be in the gallery or Magnus. And I see we have another question. Jean Mooney.
Hello. It was actually great to stop by on Sunday and see the show briefly. I have 2 questions. One is, I guess, are you both shooting in RAW, which gets back to the question, of, I agree, the whole concept of you're shooting something and you bring it back because you're creating what you wanted to see. So that was the first question. And then I had the opportunity to chat a little bit with Magnus about the art of actually printing a photograph. And so I was curious to hear a little bit, maybe Bert, if I could ask you that question, and Magnus, you could enlighten the folks, is the challenge of, do you home print your pieces, choosing a paper, or, working with with the printer? Because once you've created the image, for yourself on your laptop or your desktop, getting it to be what it is, once it prints, I find is another challenge.
Sure. So first of all, yes, I do use RAW all the time. And about printing, I have a printer that can print up to 13 by 19 inch paper. And I printed, as did Magnus on his printer, printed all of the images that are actually on display. And I think printing is fabulous. And especially printing big prints is a fabulous thing. There is no place to hide. If there's anything wrong with your image, it's there. But when it's right, it's just sort of wonderful to look at. And so I usually find that for something, every print that's on display was first test printed in a 4 by 6 inch size. And you have to let it dry for, overnight or for several hours so the colors will be the way they're going to be. And then I looked at it and said, does it look muddy? Does it look too bright, too dark? Is there contrast in the places where I want to see it? Like in the glacier, can you see the textures that you want to see? And then I'll go back to Lightroom and try to work on whatever it was that I think still needs work. And some of them, the first test print, I said, this is good to go. And other ones I probably made 3 or 4 before I was satisfied. And then finally, when I get to that point, I'll print it big. And some people really think hard about what kind of paper to use, and they, you know, have a lot, they're very thoughtful about that. I can't say that I do that. I have a semi-gloss paper that I like to use, and that's just what I print everything in. So from that point of view, it's not too much to the story.
Can I ask a question, Jean, because Jean is an amazing photographer herself. Okay, she has shown her work in the BGA in previous shows. Jean, what, for the uninitiated such as myself, when you say raw, what does that mean?
Why don't we have Bert and Agnes
Is it
are
like, does it
better.
mean non-manipulation, or what does it really, what does it mean?
I'll let the pros
Okay.
explain that.
Okay.
So let me take a whack at it. The cameras that can produce raw files, the raw file has exactly 100% of the information that was recorded in the camera's sensor without any loss from compression into a JPEG file or anything else. And generally there's a lot more resolution. So like in a JPEG file, each point can have one of 256 levels of brightness in each color. But in the raw files, typically it's more, you know, several thousand or more. So there's more detail in there that you can work with if you want to go into the darker areas of the picture and brighten them up. You can get a much better result from the raw file. The raw files also have some amount of headroom, so things that would just be flat white in the JPEG, there's still data up there that you can pull out up to a point. So those are the advantages. Is you just preserve a lot more of the information you preserve all of the information that was recorded at the time when you snap the shutter.
Interesting.
I do just want to put in here to let people know that in February, we're going to have Magnus and Bert do a talk on the more technical aspects of photography. like this or whatever. I suppose now would be a time if you wanted to say, oh, please talk about whatever, please let them know. Magnus, was there anything you wanted to add to the explanation of the raw files?
Because we're
I think Bert nailed it. But yeah, actually, this is super helpful to find out what people would be interested in. So, okay, so far, so printing, lenses, process for editing, those are, okay, so those are then things I will try to hit on in the talk in February.
I'll just, while I'm still on unmute, I'll just say, Magnus, to answer your question, I went to the 1915 report about the land management committee had on the Pine LA.
Okay.
Yeah, I told you that I had that somewhere. And so the Pine LA was originally part of the Highland Stock Farm that was established in 1859. And then the property was sold to McLean in 1906. They don't actually know whether or not the Pine LA was originally planted as a windbreak for the stock farm, or if it was later done by McLean as something more aesthetic. So it's a little bit unclear. Obviously it was intentionally planted, but by whom doesn't seem to be known. And that was the professionals who are doing the restoration work, which you saw the young pines and the Pine LA there.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
I just had a thought because we're going to have to wrap up. So if there's anybody among the group here tonight that have specific questions, when we do the more technical event, you could send those to me and Adine, and that's something we could maybe, we would use that as we're formatting that event, pass along those questions to Bert and Magnus. That might be helpful. So they already have, they know, like, there are some questions that people are interested in having answered or whatever. So anyway, that's something, admin@belmontgallery.org. And Adine and I will discuss that.
Just before we wrap up, I wanted to let you know, we will have one other event. Another person who went to college near Boston, Meg Muckentop, who is an author who was in our class. We'll be doing a talk on Boston, the green spaces and the gardens of Boston. So please stand by for information on that. That will be in February too, as well as Bert and Magnus's technical photography talk. So
I also want to take just a second to thank Julie DeStefano in the Belmont Media Center, because they've hosted a number of virtual receptions for the BGA while, during the pandemic. And they've been wonderful. They've live streamed these events for us. They recorded them. So then people who couldn't be here tonight, who might want to view the reception, are able to do that in another week or so. So thank you, Julie, for doing this. And we're thankful that you're here this evening. And again, we have the virtual BGA.org. Adine has done a magnificent job of curating the show in the virtual gallery. And we have the show in person at the BGA, curated, hung also by Bert and Magnus. This is amazing. They basically did soup to nuts for this exhibit, and we're so appreciative. So you can, see all of their aesthetic work, their handiwork, if you come up to the gallery. And we're typically open Thursdays all day until 4 o'clock, and Sunday afternoons from 1 to 4. Oh,
Bless you.
okay. And again, you can look at the website, belmontgallery.org as well to get more information. So I think that's a wrap, right, Adine?
That's a wrap. Thank you all for coming out tonight. This was really fun. Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Magnus.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great. Enjoyed it very much.
And thank you
Thank
to all
you.
my friends who are on here. It's really nice to see you there.
Yeah, good to
Yes.
see you all.
Appreciate it.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
We love seeing new faces. Thank you very
Rebecca,
much.
could you say the date one more time of the technical talk?
Oh, we have.
So it's going to be either February, well, we think it's going to be February 17th. That
Okay.
Meg's talk will be February 10th on the
February
Boston
17th.
Gardens. And that Magnus and Bert will give their more technical presentation on February 17th. All the events are at 7 p.m.
Okay, because I didn't see it on there, but February 17th. Okay, terrific. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Thank you very much.
This was wonderful. Bye.
Oh, bye, Dari and Naomi. It all started with the BAA meeting, Okay.
Yay.
Thanks for coming. Thanks, Aisha. Thanks,
All right,
Nora.
take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.